Hi, everyone. This is the Legislative Review Committee, Thursday, October 5th, 2023. We're meeting today in City Hall. We have Commissioners Poole and Wright here with us at this point. Perhaps we will have some others joining us. But we want to start this agenda today with an approval of the minutes from September 7th.
So moved, unless there's any corrections that somebody might have.
Well, I'm going to be honest, I haven't had a chance to read these yet.
Okay.
But I trust that they're good. So, yeah.
I look forward to reading them again when we're back on that topic.
Yes, they're also very helpful.
Good minutes.
So is that a second?
Yes, a second on date. And trust.
Okay. Okay, we have a second from Commissioner Poole. All in favor? Aye. Okay, let's move on. We don't have any public input because there's no one here from the public. But I'm gonna pass this over to Assistant Manager Nikki Jones, who will introduce us to our topic of the afternoon.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers. I'll read the mayor's charge quickly to give us some context on what we're being asked to do. So his charge is as follows: examine modifications to the code of ordinances related to invasive plant species, specifically identify means by which bamboo and other invasive plant species in the ordinance can be mitigated. And staff has had a preliminary conversation just to kind of make sure that we were all on the same page and figure some things out prior to this meeting. And we came to the conclusion that this might be two separate issues here, but we'd love to hear back from the LRC on what y'all think. So issue one, as we see it, related to the charge, would be thinking about public nuisance of invasive plant species and then how the invasive plants might impact neighbors. So what that means is enforcement, reaction to, if you will. And then issue two would possibly be, new developments not allowing invasive plant species, i.e. the zoning code. So we have a new development. As you all know, we have a planning schedule for new developments, going back and making sure that we're not saying plant invasive species in our zoning code. And if we are, change that. So that basically means, how can we stop invasive species planting going forward as it relates to us and our zoning code? And that is something that we can control specifically, right? That the LRC, the Mayor Commission can make a policy about. So we discussed a number of questions, and all of this can help us get kicked off into a conversation, but we discussed a number of questions. One, do we have a list of invasive plant species in our county in Georgia? And the answer is yes. However, in the Code of Ordinances, there's no definition for invasive plant species. There's no definition for that. So that might be something we want to think about going forward. We talked about, Category 1 and Category 2 invasive plant species. Mike and Stephanie can go into further detail about that, and I think, that might be of interest to y'all. Further, we also discussed, are there plants that we should focus on? Well, we know we should focus on bamboo because that's in the charge. Additionally, maybe looking at the Category 1 and Category 2 species. A question we had, what are the overall challenges and problems that these plants can create? Talked about several things, and again, we've got experts in the room, so we can talk more about that. But generally speaking, leading causes of native plant diversity loss related to invasive plants, the cost of removing them manually or chemically, destroying trees and creating erosion issues. These are all things that we see invasive plants impacting, and ultimately there's a financial impact. So that might be of interest for y'all. Of course, we talked about the local government's role, right? There are a number of roles that we can play, but today our role is enforcement to some extent. We have the ability to reduce new planting, through our zoning code and things of that nature. Certainly education, and we are already in the process of removing invasive plants on our property. So the sustainability team are doing that already. So there certainly is a role there. Current state of affairs when it comes to this, when it comes to neighborhood disputes, it's a complaint-based.
Complaint-driven.
Yep. So we're reactive if you go to it, but we are doing it. And then the number of calls that we've gotten, and John's here today, he can speak more into this. The number of calls that we've gotten, to our understanding, are very little over the past several years. And I'll defer to Code Enforcement to talk about that.
So there's,
Well, real quick.
oh, you want to do that?
Yeah, real quick. And then there's a future state. So we don't know the future state. Ultimately, I think that's what we're here to kind of talk about, is the future state. And as we think about the future state, what is the local government's role in dealing with invasive plant species in our county? And I'll stop there. And, I think this is an appropriate time to have a conversation, and certainly open. We got the experts in the room, so.
Yeah, had you talked with the experts in the room about their role today? So is there anyone you'd like to start with?
Well, are there questions that you all want more detail about? Because I kind of glazed over some of the questions that we talked about.
Well, there's some familiar territory. Sherry, when was the last time we had this? I think it was you and I.
I think there was a talk about vegetation, if I remember correctly.
Was it the overgrown? I thought with the overgrown lawn LRC charge, we covered invasive plants.
So this
So help me out with that.
this control of vegetation was rewritten in 2017,
Okay.
which gave us a little bit more teeth to mainly do overgrowth. We identify the 10 inches as being, and Bill Berryman obviously put together a way of dealing with it kind of narrowly defined. So we were really kind of going after the grass. The grass is being overgrown. And so since that time, we've done about 500, almost 600 cases. Running about 100 a year, very heavy in the spring and summer is when people start complaining. And they're complaining because you have those little dandelion heads or whatever that pop up and they want the grass cut. We went back and kind of drilled down on these cases, and there's about a dozen that deal with specifically an invasive call out of some nature. Kudzu, English ivy, and bamboo are the three that we've actually dealt with. The English ivy is, the ordinance talks about you shall not allow this to grow up onto your house, soffits. We don't want it covering windows and doors for safety concerns. And that's where the ivy has come in. We've had about 3 cases where people started to allow that to happen, and in all cases, we were able to get them to clear it. The others, kudzu, of course, as you know, is just all over the place. And we get it with a lot of lots sometimes, where you get these commercial lots. They're not managing it in the back, and then either a neighbor or a whole row of neighbors starts to complain. And again, we've been successful in having them knock it back. Maybe not totally eradicate it, but obviously during this time of year, as it starts to slow down, it will die off to a degree. I mean, there's probably other ways that, we can talk later or talk today about how you want to mitigate this stuff. The bamboo, obviously, which is where the charge came from a case in 5 Points where 4 or 5 neighbors were impacted by this strand of bamboo. And it came to our attention through the complainant who didn't want the bamboo to be on her property. But because of the way our code is written, we took our pictures, got our information, and we took it back to the attorney's office. And both the manager and the attorney both stated that they didn't feel comfortable moving forward because of the specific language that was missing, which was, in this case, the word bamboo. But, yeah, go ahead, Sherry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's helpful to explain the current state of the code. So we have two parts of the code that speak to this issue potentially. So the first one is control of vegetation, which is section 3-5-9. And And then okay, so 3-5-9A is where the definitions are, and I'll come back to that. B underneath it is the height restrictions that John was just talking about. And so that's where we have, it says that every owner or person in possession of a lot or lands within Athens-Clarke County shall cause the lot or lands to be kept free from weeds and turf grasses over 10 inches in height. And then it continues. And so above that, and actually immediately above that section, in A7 is the definition of weeds. And I would say to you all that I think this definition is not ideal because it's not as specific as it could be. It says weeds means any and all vegetation, including without limitation honeysuckle. Of note, we have invasive Japanese honeysuckle, but we have a native honeysuckle that is not
listed.
Pernicious. Kudzu, Jimson, burdock, ragweed. Ragweed is a native. Then you have thistle, cockburl, etc. And then it says it excludes trees, ornamental plants, vegetable gardens, and managed natural landscapes. And our interpretation is that bamboo, even though I may personally dislike it and it's a category 2 invasive, is an ornamental plant. People plant it for its ornamental value. And so we think it is not included in this definition of weeds. So then the next part of our code that's relevant is the nuisance abatement section. And that relates to undesirable vegetation. And that's section 3-13-7. And it says, it shall be unlawful for the owner and or occupant of any occupied lot of land in Athens-Clarke County, or the owner of any unoccupied lot, etc., to permit or maintain on such lots, on that lot, any growth of undesirable vegetation. So it doesn't actually speak to vegetation going on to a lot that the person doesn't own. And then the definition of undesirable vegetation, which I'm going to jump to in a second, is found in section 3-13-2. And it is plants which due to natural growth characteristics constitute a negative effect on public safety, public health, or public welfare. I would argue, well, I would say that there's some concern about how broad that definition could be, because if we're talking about a negative effect on public welfare or health, that could include invasives, but it's not clear. And certainly the idea of an ornamental bamboo that someone planted probably as a screen, I don't think it meets the definition as currently written of undesirable vegetation. So that's where we are. And so there are some communities who've passed ordinances related to the planting of invasives, including allowing it to encroach onto another person's property. But I do want to be very clear from the beginning that it is unlikely that an ordinance passed now is going to address the problem that the complainant has in 5 points, because we can't make something unlawful retroactively. This is a unique problem, to be fair, because bamboo is continuing to grow. And so there's a question of essentially, is it continuing to encroach? But if we were to pass an ordinance that makes encroachment illegal, probably the best practice for someone who is currently affected is to remove a current stand of whatever the invasive plant is from their property. And then we could talk about preventing future encroachment.
So it would be documenting that they, and I didn't hear you talk about the part, remember that a person's vegetation covering the ability for the fire department or to find the front door.
Sure.
Being one there.
So that would be the undesirable.
Exiting.
Entrance, exit. Yeah, like if they go through their carport all the time, that doesn't allow the fire department or emergency to get to them. But I thought that there was something about when your ivy goes over your fence, and now it's in the neighbors. Did you read the part that covers that? Or
I don't think there is a part that covers it.
I thought we had.
Well, it's not left out in language other than the fact that it's becoming invasive because it's crossed
property line.
Right, if we can show that the ivy or the kudzu, is clearly going over from your place into the neighbor's yard, that's not a hard one to tell them that they have to knock that back. It's where, in this case of the bamboo, we have backyards backed up to each other. with no access and very wood, other than the access that's given to us by the complainant, which means you go into her backyard, and then all of a sudden you can see bamboo, which transcends 3 or 4 lots. It's full of it. And so the question is, well, where did it start? How did it start? We didn't see how it started. So it's hard to try to then just tell everybody that they have to remove under this current ordinance, that they got to remove the bamboo from their own yard. That we don't know that it's actually started in their yard, but you can imagine if we expand that, my only concern would be trying to understand what the whole list of plants are. I mean, you could have all kinds of plants back there without being botanists or whatever, arborist type folks. We don't want to be picking and choosing just because somebody's complaining. Or at least not want to get into that if I could.
And the nature of bamboo, and I'll ask them that, subject matter experts here, is a little bit different, right? Like the rhizomes, because they creep differently, so it's really hard to understand the origins of such plant, right?
I mean, yeah. So there's several types of bamboo, but the one that usually is the nuisance bamboo is going to be one that spreads by rhizomes, meaning underground roots. So, or runners. And so unless the only way you could determine where that bamboo started would be through, you'd have to, you would have known if the neighbors knew who planted it, or you could really get into the weeds and go look at aerial imagery back several years and look for the signature of bamboo, because it's going to probably show up as a signature on aerial, and then you could really, if you really wanted to do investigative work. But bamboo is a different one in that, so it's going to keep spreading, and it's not going to spread one certain direction, right? Mm-hmm. So it's going to spread from all points, but it might grow faster one direction than the other. So even so it would be very hard retroactively without really doing a lot of PI work, to figure out where that bamboo came from if no one's standing up saying, hey, yeah, I planted it in my yard, because it could have been there for 3-4 decades. I don't know.
And the forest that you're talking about is, in my example, it's obvious when it sprouts 3 feet into my yard. Mm-hmm. I know exactly what yard it came from. Right. So that's the beginning one that I eradicate, take a picture of, mm-hmm. and then if it popped back up, then I'm in neighbor warfare. So it's a challenging thing because it is a neighbor to neighbor issue. I think
obviously.
Yeah. And the empty lot ones the commercial ones seem a little more straightforward because they're not really, it's a neighbor to neighbor thing. But I had thought the part of what our current ordinance says was that we flat out didn't have bamboo listed. And even though it is a grass.
It is a grass.
Technically, it's not the lawn grass that we're talking about.
Right, that's correct.
Yeah.
And Sherry, I don't know. I think that when the ordinance was written, it was trying to tailor it to be in a narrow, it wasn't trying to go after a bunch of invasives. It was really trying to go after this grass that you have in your yard that you haven't mowed. They were trying to tailor it to that for the most part. That's where we were getting our complaints, and we really couldn't do anything with what we had before. And now we can send a warning out, and we could follow that up with a citation. And I think we've only written 1 citation, but I think it was for the English Ivy. It took us a while to get one gentleman to pull it off with his house. But for the grasses, we pretty much have not, I don't think we've cited anybody for the grass just yet. But we've had cases.
Would the appropriate designation between the two be turf-style grass versus others? Is that?
Yeah, it could. And we're certainly, let's be honest, the ordinance as currently written was written by people who clearly didn't have a lot of specific knowledge about the plants that they might want to exclude. So we certainly could be more specific. And we have a current kind of conflict between ornamental plants and grasses and weeds and what that means. Because I think, to be fair, lots of people have different ideas of what that means. So without good definitions, it's hard to have any clarity.
Commissioner Houle had a question.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to get back to where in the code we're looking. And I appreciate the 2 that you cited. And then when I was searching through this before, I got confused because if you search for the word invasive, it's mentioned in a number of other places in our code too.
I think those are all the zoning codes.
So yeah, I guess I'd be curious how this affects that too. I mean, do we need to just come up with a comprehensive definition of invasive first and foremost?
I think that would be helpful to have, and if I looked through this previously, and I believe all of the other references to invasives are related to zoning. Yeah, so there's rules about not planting invasives in open spaces. There's rules about site design standards, but as far as I know, there's not a definition. I think the experts can say, but I think most people think category 1 and 2 is the prime area, but the problem that you all should be aware of is that includes a lot of things like privet, like
And sold at big box stores.
Bandina, Elaeagnus, like lots of things that people use as hedges.
And
Hedges.
Yeah, speaking of which.
Not that we have any control over that.
So yeah, I mean, just like our own code already is even in those sections like inconsistent. So 914A 13 says kudzu, Chinese privet, and Japanese honeysuckle. Just says those three. But then section 8719 says English ivy, Chinese privet, Japanese honeysuckle, kudzu, and other invasive or non-native plants, which gets into this whole what do we count or not count. So I almost wonder if like a way to move us forward is to just hone in on what plants do we think make sense to even list at all or not. Then from there figure out if and how to enforce them, so that it can be applied like across the board to all these different sections.
And I'll defer to, again, the subject matter experts here. We've had that exact same conversation. And what I was educated on is that category 1 and 2, I think generally speaking, you would like to say are all invasive, but then the question comes up, Sherry mentions that some of these things are being sold like by local Lowe's, Home Depot, Copers, exactly. Like, so they're selling them. We're saying you can't go. So I think that's a challenge. But
Well, I appreciate what you were bringing up and making sure that we're not trying to grow the scope of our assignment, but also make sure that we're consistent across when you certify, you make sure we're coming up with.
The scope of our assignment is just a code of ordinances related to invasive plant species. So then I start searching in our MENA code for the word invasive.
Yeah.
And it pops up in the places that, we've started this conversation about, but also these other places.
Yeah, so maybe we can, at the next meeting, either have those or have staff look at what those are to advise us on the consistency of them. I mean, as far as the bamboo that's in the patio at 10's most best, it's confined. And that's one thing versus the backyard that is open.
Right.
And I'm sorry I'm late, I'm going to have to run. But I'm going to try to touch on what Manager Jones brought up. If these stores and retailers are selling this stuff, I don't say stuff, selling these, what kind of pushback are we going to get from the community as we proceed forward? Or is we don't expect any, but what are the possibilities of retailers
pushing back. I don't know the answer. However, we did talk about what Florida did, and Stephanie, if you could talk a little bit about that.
So in my experience, so the retailers are selling what they can make money off of, right? So it's just like anything else, it's kind of, there's an economic development model. There are models across the country, and I know there are some groups in Florida, especially, that's where I have kind of the most background in industry work in, that they've successfully gone to the big box retailers and asked them individually to sign on to an agreement, basically, voluntary, that they would not sell any of the category 1, category 2 species in their store. And like in the Keys, as part of there's a cooperative invasive species management area in the Keys, and they were really successful for the most part across the board, getting those big box retailers to voluntarily sign to say that we won't sell these. And I think with education,
Yeah.
I think you could do that in our community to a certain point. Now, that's not guaranteeing that everyone's going to, and then you still have to you also have to factor in that the person ordering may not actually know that what they're ordering is a category 1. So there is a step into that. You have to educate folks because they just don't know. And then there's education on the consumer side. So most people, when you go into a lawn center or something like that, you're not looking so there is a percentage of people who go and looking for very specific plants. But a lot of times you go and you say, hey, I have this condition, I need something, this is what I want. And so if they don't have it because they've agreed not to sell it, then you remove a whole lot of those species then being sold because the consumer doesn't know that they want to go in and ask for Mandina. Now they might because they've seen it in their neighbor's yard and it's really pretty in the fall and it gets orange berries and it's red. But what they don't know is that it can kill birds and other wildlife species.
That's what I'm talking about.
And so it's it's a kind of, you'd have to go at it from a double-edged sword. Do I think something like that is doable from the wholesale in Athens? I think so. But it would be an educational campaign, and you'd have to get the local Lowe's and Koffers and other people to sign on to say, hey, we understand why we are going to say we're not selling these, and we agree. And so, yeah.
And I guess that was what my point. Every time we come here and we come up with something we have to revise, we don't get the input or we don't educate the bulk. We just come up with something and then we're having input for 2 and 3 hours. I do think that education should be on the front end of everything that we do that is going to impact the community. Now, what that looks like, how we educate or how I don't know that, but Commissioner Hoare was talking about, that would be but to me, the education piece should be one of our first steps.
Commissioner Thornton, because what you're saying now brings me back to the point I wanted to bring up here, is when we get into a discussion of invasives and just a general discussion, that's something. But if I come back to actually what Assistant Manager Jones brought up at the beginning as issue 1 and issue 2, there's issue 2, new developments. So putting in something where we can put it into our zoning code. But issue 1 was about it being a public nuisance, and I'm getting a little confused here as well on that, because I have a house, or someone has a house. Are we, if we take bamboo, for example, are we saying, damn me putting bamboo somewhere in my yard or one of the others, is that outlawed? Can I do that, at Ted's or somewhere else? Or is it only a problem when it becomes a nuisance? If I have something and then it's controlled, is that a privet? Let's take privet. That's much easier in a way. You might put privet, might not be on the new development place, but it comes up all the time in other people's yards. It's not as big as the bamboo. Can I no longer put privet there in my yard? Or are we just talking about the nuisance to other people outside of mine?
I think
and that's
the question, because that is kind of the crux of the question, because of the very fact that some of the plants that we're talking about would operate as nuisance in different ways. So bamboo is not going to magically appear 2 lots down because you planted it in your planter in your yard. It's going to spread underground and spread, but it's not going to spread by seed. Take privet, for example. Privet will appear 2-3 yards down next door, half an acre over, depending on where the bird or the rodent that happened to eat that seed use the toilet. So that is the difference between, and so you do have to kind of, that's the question. So what are we?
What problem are we trying to solve?
What problem are you trying to solve? And there are it is I think Mike and we would all agree that there are different rungs of this. Would we on a large scale really like to solve the problem of invasive species within Athens? Yes, we would like to make strides to solve that, and part of that would be to put to look at how do we stop people from planting those species in their yard. But also when looking at, and then the other was how do we stop them from being a nuisance while they're in their yard? And the reasoning, just to make a point, the reasoning, the difference between category 1s and category 2s, it speaks to that, what I'm talking about. So bamboo is listed as a category 2. The reason why it's listed, so those categories are designed based on basically the aptitude or the way that species is a threat to natural environments and can spread. And so bamboo is a threat. It will completely shade out. It will change the ecosystem, but it doesn't spread by seed. So therefore, it has to be intentionally placed somewhere to start with. And that's why it's in a category 2 and not category 1 for us here in the Piedmont area of Georgia. And that's why privet and other ones are in category 1s, because they readily spread. Once they're there, they'll go wherever they happen to end up. And so there is a difference even in the, I don't think probably going above board. But yeah, that's the question. Like, where do you want to step in and how do we do that?
Thank you. And can I just ask, like, back to the original, the cool product here with the bamboo situation, you seem to know more about it, and you mentioned 4 or 5. Is in that case, is there specific knowledge that it was planted intentionally by one of the owners of property, or is it?
I would dare say that the property owner that planted it is no longer on this planet. That's
right.
how long this forest has been, similar to in these older neighborhoods that we have. We were able to eradicate it in our yard 30 years ago.
Right.
So that's how I know it's the neighbors' stuff that's coming over.
But
this case, but since he's been on site, I would say that once you saw it, you probably saw the backyards of more than just the next door neighbor. So you don't know that gives you 5 houses to wonder which one.
So I look at it from the point of view of making a court case if I have to make a court case. And so without knowing, or without somebody saying, oh yeah, I planted that 6 years ago and I started it right here, without them actually saying that to you, you're going to be talking to all 5 of the individuals or 4 of the individuals, however many lots you have, because of what the complainant is asking. But let's say bamboo's included in this, then we have to figure out how to make that case, and there might not be makeable.
And in this case, just again, so I can understand it, does this complainant feel that he or she has a specific, like if you were gonna, like, do they say it's house 3 over here, that's where it started 40 years ago? Or do they say this is, I mean, because otherwise, in terms,
there's a lot of knowledge there.
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's not, because that'd be different from the 5 of us coming together and say, gosh, we got this problem, how are we going to work on it together?
Right. And she spoke at one of our meetings.
Yeah.
Got assigned. So again, he's talking about going to court, the origin, visually, you might be able to look and say it's definitely coming from this house. But if it's also 2 houses over, the neighbor in the middle doesn't care.
Right.
They didn't plan it, but they just didn't care to stop it. And so now it's at neighbor 3. Or that's what you're saying.
So do you make individual cases against all 4 people because you've identified bamboo or an invasive species on their property and let the court system play out based on that alone? That you have it. I've seen it from, that's another thing. We don't tramps through people's yards unless we have permission to do such. So if we can't see it from the front of the house, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to catch everybody's bamboo. But if we get into somebody's backyard, we can make a case based on what we see. I think that's the question. You could be weaponizing this because people could be going after their neighbor's privet hedge because it's on your you don't want to do that. I don't think that's not what we're looking for. That might be why this was narrowly drawn just to grasses and just to say, you got to know your grass.
And
that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, and curbside complaint. That was curbside complaint. Now we're dealing with what's more backside property line with this. I appreciate getting more of the category 1 and 2 definitions from you as well, because you can't define what the bird has dropped somewhere versus tracking the root system or the ivy. Because
Can I mention,
I was waiting for the.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking so much here. Commissioner Thornton.
What? Did you say something about killing birds or making birds sick?
Yes, so heavenly bamboo, which is not a bamboo, but nandina, most people known as nandina. So the berries actually have arsenic in them.
Arsenic.
I believe it's arsenic as a compound, and so there's certain bird species that are known, their feeding habits make them prone to, it would kill any bird, but there's certain birds that because of how they feed, they will go in and gorge on berries, especially in the winter. And so then what happens is you'll find, so cedar waxwings are one bird that there's numerous cases across the country where people walk out and they find a bunch of cedar waxwings dead. When they've done the necropsy studies, it's because they were eating nandina. So that species is definitely, it has been linked to numerous, it's a known cause of wildlife death.
And what category is it?
That one I think is a category one.
I think it's a
I'll tell you.
But that's
It's a category 2.
Category two.
I just have it open. I sent everybody the list, by the way.
And I would guess it is invasive.
Okay.
And I would guess that it's a category 2 based on also, so it does spread once it's planted, but it doesn't spread as readily as the category 1.
Okay.
And so that's why it is still as a category 2. It's also one of those species though that like, it takes a certain amount of time and you get enough of them in a certain area and then it's kind of off to the races and they start to spread more.
So Nandina is a species that's commonly sold in Home Depot. Those.
Oh, I know it.
Well, real quick, going back to, maybe educating folks in our community not to sell such species. That's totally fine, I think. But let's recognize that we could only do that for Athens-Clarke County, and then right over in the Oconee County border, there's a Home Depot and there's a Lowe's. So if somebody really wanted to buy Nandina, they could just do that.
Let me recognize Mike Thornton.
Yeah, sorry.
thank you, just a couple of things that may help. This is Stephanie Green, and she's our ecological coordinator out of the sustainability office, and she's the one who's been spearheading our current management practices, like the complete renovation of Dudley Park from a natural resource and along the Greenway. So I just wanted to give you context. You can tell she's quite knowledgeable. The other is the categories are coming from the Georgia Invasive Plant Council. So they have definitions of what invasive plant is. They will tell you what those plants are and help kind of shape that discussion. So that gives a good framework. And that is a state maintained list for the most part. It's like a lot of agencies, they go up and down, but they do a good job of it. The third thing is we have had conversations. There's kind of a two-pronged education. One is reaching out to the big box, but you also have to give the constituents that we have in the community an alternative. And we do have local growers at our nurseries that are local, like Evergreen. I've had conversation with them, Copers. They're also interested in growing natives if they can sell natives. So as we, in discussions with the Cooperative Extension Service, they would love to be able to develop and work with us to develop an educational process that then shows, don't plant this, and kind of give that type of thing. So we have this kind of holistic educational approach that we can take, stopping at sales, creating market from our growers, and then giving substitute information. That will take some time to put something like that together and some resources. But that would be, I think, an important a leg in the stool on that one.
And education is a current role that we have today.
That is right. That is one of the things our office does. It's one of the things that Landscape does, and one of the things that Legal Services does as well. So we and Cooperative Extension all have active roles.
And I appreciate that because that gives us, like you were saying earlier, Nikki, we'll be a good role model. And the kudzu concerns me, so I'm glad that you guys are already tackling that because I definitely don't want to do as I say, not as I do when we roll this out. There's obviously still more work to be done, but if we're able to tell people how to tackle it, because that's the green way we're doing it now. You're my saying green, but green way that we're doing it, that we're doing Those are all positives, I think, in the direction. Tell me about wisteria. Category what?
That is a category 1.
The Chinese wisteria.
Yeah, there is a native wisteria, but you don't see it very often. You can buy it, but so the problem with so this is a region and a nationwide problem between the selling and availability. So it's economics 101, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the plants that are available in our box stores, a lot of which are not native, and most of those are Asian based. Because they grow well in our latitude and our regions, and there's something new and exciting, right? And so wisteria, kudzu, they landed on our shores in like the late 1800s, and most of those really pretty ones that we all now relate with the South in the spring and that kind of thing are early results of several different prongs. So World's Fairs that would happen, and different countries have their exhibits. Kudzu was on exhibit in a World's Fair in like 1840, 1860 something. And it was in bloom and it smelled good and it was really pretty and everybody was like, I want that. Same thing with wisteria. And then you go into so kudzu was then people were paid to plant it on their land for erosion control based on really poor agricultural practices, right? In the 1930s. Wisteria is just one of those that it's really pretty. And it flowers in the early spring when everything is still gray and gloomy, and then you get this big pop of purple. And but it can spread on its own, birds eat it, it keeps going in, and it does large scale damage. It covers trees, it will kill them, shade them out, and then by process, it's killing and shading out everything underneath it. And we have several properties that we've treated wisteria. We spend a lot of money treating wisteria and a lot of time and sweat equity treating it, and we still don't win that battle. But I think most people nowadays, very few people are going to the store at the lead and saying, I want wisteria, because they can all point to the roadside and be like, what is that monster growing? Yeah. So that's the difference though. When it's on the roadside and it's a monster, you see it and you don't want that. But if you see something like Nadine or something like that, that could be the next wisteria in 10 years from now with climate change and the mass amounts planted. It's not going to do the same damage, but quantity-wise, you don't recognize that as a problem because it's in a pot, it's in your yard. And so I could show you a wisteria planted somewhere and maintained and trimmed and it looks beautiful. And no one would have a problem with that, and they don't equate that to the same thing that's covering, Mitchell Bridge and that whole area in the spring. And so it's education and it's pointing out, but I've gone off topic. But yeah, wisteria is bad. We treat a lot of it.
No, I agree. And even if we were talking about pets, a good pet owner and a good responsible way to do it. It's the topic, and then when the topic becomes a nuisance, so back to some of the ways we started talking about these things is the educational component. And, when you see your neighbor's tree dying because the wisteria is as big as the arm, I may or may not have climbed over the fence and cut some of these things. I fight invasives. It's a concept. The ivy, when the ivy's also as big as at the bottom, and but anyway, it's you have to be adamant about it, but also letting people know that what they have can become the problem somewhere else with those categories. Who's going to talk to us about these pretty pictures?
I put those together. Those are actually sites that we are currently under management. That the ones on the front page are the Managed Forest Project out at Sandy Creek Nature Center, where we started out. People are literally those are invasives that are head high or better. And then you see the results below that. So it's before and after, and then to the right is where the results of that about a year later.
This was not a control burn.
That wasn't the control burn. That was hand removed.
Okay, so this is not, this is good.
Yeah, those
bad.
Yeah, the first two, and then you'll see in the middle page, the picture there is what again some property primarily privet. One of the, I guess if there's anything to say about nice privet is once you remove it and you treat the resprouts, it will stay out for a long period of time. So it's not one like wisteria where you battle for years and you feel like you aren't winning. You can have a huge effect on some of these shrubs like Elaeagnus privet those you can do. And on the back, you can see some more examples. That's again from that same area so we just wanted to demonstrate the difference between what it looks like and what happens when you treat it. And the native, if you go to the nature center, between the different activities that were done there, you're seeing wildlife you haven't seen in 50 years out there has come back. So that habitat management really does make a difference, and it has this kind of cascade effect through the system, because it's not only what happens on the land, but it also the impact that goes into water, how these natural areas filter water. Some trivia that's great if you're on playing that at Blind Pig someday. The native plants hold the dirt better. Invasive plants are typically shallower rooted, so they allow erosion. That puts more particulate matter into your water. Water heats up. The particles in the water will heat up at a significantly higher rate than the water itself. And that's why water will tend to warm up if it is cloudy versus clear. It'll warm up faster. There were trout in the North Oconee River when Bartram came through in the 1800s, and you could see pebbles at 20 feet, and now you're lucky to see a school bus at 4 inches. But that's the kind of change that comes from human activities and things like that. And this is where these invasives have a lot of cascade through the system that we don't really see. And the way they change the way the soil is, and it does go into a little bit of that, the soil is and what it encourages. So this is not only a visual and a wildlife habitat quality, this is also a human health and the services that we rely on to provide us with clean air and clean water. These are also have an impact on those. So there's a real financial as well as physical impact that these things have across.
So speaking of financial, Mike, approximately how much money do we spend a year on clearing out invasives?
So I pulled the numbers, so this is not by any means exact, because we're still working on how to actually record and scale that well. But we have, so in FY 23, we spent approximately, just in contract labor, that I know that the bulk of what they did was exotic species treatment and removal. We spent over 35,000. And keep in mind, that's only on a very few properties and few areas, probably less than 200 acres worth of area. And then I pulled some other numbers. So take Dudley Park as an example. So because of the GOS grant that's currently still in place there at Dudley. So since 2020, at least, so since we started working on invasive species under the GOS grant at Dudley, we've spent at least $37,500 just on Dudley Park treating, and that doesn't take into account the in-kind services and volunteer services and a lot of volunteer labor that also went into manually clearing and cutting privet, olives, things like that. So it's not exactly an answer to your question, but it gives you a pretty good idea of, so we're spending quite a bit of money just on a few properties right now, and we know that across the board on county natural areas, like it is probably the number one management issue that we do face from our natural areas, as far as what we can do that would increase the habitat quality on those sites. And I looked, there was a study that was done, not in Georgia, but across the US in 2021. They did a study and showed that invasives, now this is all invasives, this is aquatic, you name it, but invasives in general, it was 21 billion to the US economy. It's not a US problem either. This is world, our plants that we love and that don't do anything here, they're invasive in Australia, and in Europe. So this is a human nature kind of thing, because we all like new, and we all like what we don't have in our backyards, right? And so from a financial point, that's just really quick, dirty numbers, at least 37,000 or around 36 last year on just invasive.
And there's a difference too between initial, where you gotta go in and try to wipe them out and get some degree of control, and then the maintenance level. So you have really two different levels, and it takes between 3 and 5 years from the time you attack a fully invaded area that's heavily invaded to get it to the maintenance level, depending on what the plant is that you're going after.
Yeah, I want to return us to our charge, because it's almost 2:00 here, and the issue 1 and issue 2 that our assistant manager brought up, and,
Public nuisance.
issue 2, in a sense, well, actually, maybe both of them. Issue 2, with the development, eliminating invasives, I mean, I would like to see us have some ordinance language that we could put forward that might be, that would work. I'm not sure if the group feels like that. Issue 1, it seems like we were talking about the addition of I don't know what other definitions need to be included in there, but wasn't the idea whether or not we wanted to specifically name bamboo and other specific ones in there? It seems like the enforcement is a whole other issue as well, right? But you can't even try to enforce something that you don't have an ordinance about. And isn't the enforcement, that's not in our charge right now? Am I correct?
Well, issue 2, and I'll start here with issue 2. I think, and I'll defer to everyone else here, I think that one's a fairly easy one to accomplish. What that would require is for us to go on our zoning code to look at all the plants on the table, and if any of those are invasive, we would just say, correct me if I'm wrong, take that out.
Not plantable.
Not planted.
And are we using invasive and non-native?
I would say
It's two separate.
Well, I'll defer to y'all, category 1 and 2. But
I think so. The acceptable term broadly at this point is invasive species, not exotic and not non-native. It's understood that invasive, the definition of that generally is a species not native or not naturally occurring in that area, that then causes ecological harm or damage to that area. And so, but the acceptable term, and even a lot of the organizations, like the one that sets aside the category 1 code towards the category 2s, they're actually changing nomenclature to be using invasives and not exotic. So invasive species, I think, is a good, and we can provide a very solid definition of what we mean by invasive species. That's kind of, it is accepted by the general community, not Athens community, but the professional community and scientific community. That is the definition of invasives, and I think a lot of municipalities have used that and have accepted that. So,
and Commissioner Houle mentioned earlier that they were looking through the code and saw a number of, we kind of defined it differently, right?
Yeah, but we can use the term weeds in lieu of
Fair,
base
right.
species sometimes.
So it's an opportunity to clear that up, maybe.
Yeah, but we're going to clear some yards up. We can clear up our paperwork too. And I used the chew crew. Do you guys remember back in the day? I used that because I was battling such an invasive batch. The privet was trees, right? Trunks this big. And when that chew crew got finished, there was a jungle gym. Like the backyard had one side, and I said, "Oh, there's a jungle gym that you couldn't even see it today." But that was only just getting the greenery off, to then have to chainsaw down and do the trunks of everything. But have you guys used chew crew?
We have not, mainly because of the issues that go, I should say landscape development does. Landscape, because they have these
The corral.
the fencing that's already up on stormwater features. The other challenge is that they're indiscriminate in what they do. So when they go through, they eat everything. And it's good, bad, ugly. They just will take everything out. And we've used similar techniques when we encounter things where the invasives are so bad. You just have to you basically nuke the site. That's what you do.
Naturally.
Well, I mean, with forestry and standards. There are standards.
Yeah.
I want to recognize Commissioner Thornton and Commissioner Bull.
I do have to run, but I'm going to keep coming back to this. If number 2, you said eat pretty much a simple piece.
Could be.
And I don't know if this is a number 3, or just a thought. If there is some type of educational component that could be presented or an example or whatever else they do, I don't think we should overlook that as we move forward. So maybe it's a
See, education plan, if we,
And to piggyback on that, the water bill is often pointed to as what gets out to a lot of people.
They just need something to get out.
Get it out.
And it needs to be out, not just to residents, but also to retailers. So that's how I'm looking. And it may even be those kind of meetings with some of our big box, especially our big, well, I would even say big box, some of our local retailers, being able to give them options and stuff. Because if we wait and we come out with an ordinance and we have not touched as many people as we can, it is not going to be received well. It may not be received well, but at least we've made the effort to educate some folks.
at the next meeting, we'll come back with some sort of education strategy for you.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there are several things in the works that would fit right within your education strategy, and there's also a lot of cookbooks of how you can do that.
Okay.
So I know that in November, there will be an exotic or an invasive species workshop offered to the public at large through the Georgia Invasive Species Pest Plant Council and everything. So that will provide that information to you and people that.
Commissioner Hool?
Yeah, a couple things. So for the hopefully simpler question of just looking at our list of stuff that people can plant intentionally and removing anything. If I'm looking at this list put out by the Georgia EPPC, new org for me, the exotic pest plant control, I would think category 3 makes sense to include on that list too, because that's defined as exotic plant that is a minor problem in Georgia natural areas or is not yet known to be a problem in Georgia, but is known to be a problem in adjacent states. So if we're trying to like look ahead, I guess I would think like, why would we allow people to intentionally plant those either? And like one on that list that I happen to be familiar with personally is paper mulberry, but way less interested in what I'm personally familiar with and more interested in just the fact that if this org is, identifying that list as, so is there a reason to not also remove those?
Well, I was going to ask you, but why don't we, Stephanie seemed like she wanted to say something, so why don't you go ahead and then I can chime in.
I was going to say, so that list it will be revised as well. Like it does get revised concurrently. And I do know that they're setting up to go through and just do another like revise. And so some of those species make paper mulberry is here and in the woods already. So, but the difference, so that's a Georgia state list. And what you have to recognize that some species that are category 3s are a bigger issue in the Piedmont than they are in the coast, or they're a big issue somewhere else. So, but that is a Georgia issue. But I was just saying that the list, it's not static. It does change, and I do know that they are, and there won't be large changes, but those are the kind of changes you would expect. Either something brand new comes up or
the list will continue to exist though, right? As it evolves. So, I mean, is there a way to maybe rewrite our ordinance to instead just refer to the list?
Yeah.
And say nothing on
Would be
list
best.
categories 1 through, and so then can we include category 3 in that? I mean, we're talking about
We would love it.
intentionally planting, right?
So we include learning about that? I mean, because if for the next meeting, I would like to know more about the 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
As you guys have discussed with, and including what they brought up with the 3.
Yeah.
Does that happen?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that way we'll know how it fits in without, having to come back next year because of that. Where's muscadine fit? I want to know.
Muscadine's native.
It's a name.
But your Bradford pears, your Mahonia, those are things that are on.
Well, also is not native.
But also Bermuda grass.
Also, yeah.
So Bermuda grass is an
Category
invasive
1.
species on the categories. So I guess
It is big.
There are
it is.
Yeah.
I would say
Or sorry,
that,
two.
if you consider all of the things.
So if I may, my thought here is just, if we're trying to tackle 2 things at once here. One is, what are we allowing people to intentionally plant? And the other is, what, if anything, do we want to do about this nuisance abatement, sending out code enforcement to police plants? on the first question, in my mind, we should try to be as comprehensive as possible at not allowing the intentional planting of things that are even minor problems, because they might become major problems, or they might be problems for our neighbors.
With neglect.
And then on the nuisance abatement side, you know, I'm kind of sitting here wondering, like, I almost feel like we do need to have a conversation about, well, how enforceable is this really? Because it seems performative and maybe just creating more headaches in the end for everyone to add bamboo or maybe a bunch of other things to this list, and then just create a situation where there's no meaningful way to actually enforce this. And then we're just going around trying to educate people on how they can police their neighbors better or be better neighbors. You know, like it almost seems like maybe at that point we get away from the nuisance abatement approach at all and maybe just focus whatever those resources would be on educating people to try to do better. But
yeah, I'm not sure if we're then you're in a sense suggesting that one possibility would be just getting rid of that part altogether.
Potentially, yeah, especially if we're also acknowledging that there's no way to do anything about the stuff that's already in the ground.
But John, you have mentioned things where you have approach situations, so I don't know if we want to get rid of that.
I think the nuisance issue of something growing from one property over to another property and it's detectable. I think that is where we're talking about the literally long-standing forest of bamboo is a little bit different, especially with what Sherry's example, or I forget that was. There are none. 3 years later, it's back up, and it didn't come from the left side; it came from the right side.
And occasionally, it could be intentionally planted. I mean, you got the bamboo, but someone could do that. So, Sherry said,
sorry. I just want to chime in because I could just use some direction. I think I heard clearly from Commissioner Hull that, you know, you would like pretty much all of the options that we could consider. I've just been looking at some Georgia statutes or ordinances. And so like Brookhaven is one that's very easy. They've defined invasive vegetation. They've defined it as that list. So they've actually included, as far as I can tell, the category 4s. I mean, they've just, everything is you can't. No, but theirs a little bit different. They are just saying that they have to be maintained. So theirs isn't a prohibition on planting. It's just, if yours escapes, code enforcement come in and tell you to knock it back or whatever. So I really just could use some help in knowing the interest in having example ordinances for not planting, which Atlanta has some odd ones that they've done, but nevertheless they have that. Then the sort of just prohibition on encroachment, which is more to the bamboo issue, and whether we want to prohibit the zoning piece, so like the development piece. And then of course there also could be internal policies or ordinance related to planting on our own property, because I don't think that exists either at this moment. So whatever you all are interested in, I'm happy to prepare. I just, some direction as to what you're interested in would be helpful.
Well, I like the way you captured the maintained example again. It's most best. But that's mainly because it's in concrete.
But absolutely.
but the bamboo pops up over at Biomac. We kind of know where it came from, right? Worked across the whole parking lot. But versus escaped, which to me equals nuisance. And the escaping is not by the bird droppings, because you can't find that. It's just by actual virtue.
But we don't know that. I think that speaks to the enforceability of this. I just want us to be cognizant on how staff is going to approach it, because I think, as John said earlier, a neighbor could weaponize this, and we don't really know. But maybe it gets figured out, of course. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously the dandelions in my front yard, it would be hard if everybody else in if the people who have lawn service don't have those, and I do, and then they have them. They're pointing at me. They blew over. But we're talking about something that has a tangible escape. Like, part of it is in one yard and the other part's in the...
Even things with the rhizome structure though, right? Like bamboo.
It can go. It's underground before it pops up, actually. I mean, we have to just be cautious about us creating an ordinance or continuing to have an ordinance or whatever we do here, whatever we walk away from here doing, where like you can have a whole mess of bamboo that grows in like an undeveloped lot.
and it might pass through a corner of someone's lot and then get into the neighbor's yard. And then, you know, if that's anyone's fault, quote unquote, it would be like whoever owns that undeveloped lot more so, right? And then whoever owns the lot in the middle here is just like, I don't really care about the fact that the bamboo that's all over that adjacent property is a little bit on mine. But then if their neighbor wants to use Nikki's term, like weaponize that, you know, they can hold the middle lot accountable there. And it's easy to point to that and say, and then you start forcing someone who's like living in that middle lot to like remove and build like a 4-foot deep concrete wall at the edge of their property line with the adjacent vacant lot, instead of holding, and I don't think we'll ever be able to get to a point where we can say like, you're sort of totally originated, because it totally originated on another company, right? So,
Well, but if we have examples to come back with, will that help us process this a little bit better? But I hear your resistance in that effect, but also understanding point in time. Right. Like you said, I heard you say it. You don't want to get in the weeds, but you could with satellite stuff. I heard you say that.
And I just want to say real quickly, if I could, you know, as one of the prosecutors who handles these cases, like when they have discretion to issue citations, we have discretion as to whether to move forward with a case or not, or to work with the person. And that could actually be where the education comes in, because that's what we do with our animal cases, the animal welfare classes offered to them.
Right.
But I'll be honest, I think your example of comparing it to animal law enforcement is really similar. Like if some random dog gets dumped and starts living on someone's property and you allow it to live there, congratulations, it's now your responsibility.
Yeah.
In the same way that bamboo is. And I'm oversimplifying that, but I mean, I think that the handling it in court is not as big of a problem. Like there's some cases we aren't going to be able to make, but there are some we definitely will be able to. At least that's the way I take it.
That sounds like you got some direction. And on the, did you get some direction?
It just sounds like everybody's interested in all of the above.
But I'm not sure that we thinned it down.
It's fine. I didn't want to go down a rabbit hole nobody was interested in.
And when we started talking about it with the new developments, and then I was like, oh, like now it's like, can we put anything in there? Or like, so I guess there's some examples of ordinances that are reasonable here that
Just to be clear, so, you know, if a new development is constructed, we require tree plantings.
right.
Yeah.
Right, that's it.
Yeah.
So today, our code may have Nandina as a hedge that you can plant. I don't know that.
And we might decide that doesn't suit us on our
And
study.
it's simply just removing that, or you don't have to replace it with anything, it's just removing that.
Okay, so maybe I just need education there on our like, I have a development now, I have to look at this list, I can't put something else in there? Okay, it has to be on the list, that's why I just need
Yes,
to get
that's
education.
correct.
Yeah, and that's where the don't plant, and then having the list of what to plant.
That's right.
And a great little idea just came in front of me from over here is education instead of citation. Wait a minute, we have to use
In lieu of.
education classes in lieu of citation.
Because you could,
So again, the
it
information.
doesn't have to be
Pun-
punitive. You're right, exactly. It could be, okay, let's move them through this, and then if they repeat, then you've got an option.
What we want is compliance always,
Right, I mean, that's-
versus citation, because that doesn't necessarily achieve compliance.
Commissioner Hall.
is there anything that, my thought here is that we don't have this, but correct me if I'm wrong. Do we have anything that requires a developer of a lot to remove certain invasive species when they're developing it?
I'm not sure if we do, but I can tell you that other communities do. Atlanta, I think, is one of them that does.
So, I mean, I guess that's another thing I'd add into
We do. Oh, okay.
I'm just saying that would, if you're going to say don't plant these, I agree with you that is the last.
Yeah, I would think it would also make sense then to say they have to remove the things on these lists.
We have had internal discussions in the past about the potential to provide some kind of incentive for removal of invasives, because there's also a disincentive because there's certain places in the buffer you can't get to. Now the balance is, are you riparian buffer? So the balance is, are you trying to get in there so you can show off the property so you can sell it better? So you go in and you do a masticator and you just clean everything out, or are you really going in and getting some bonuses for removing invasives in a subdivision that you're developing inside that buffer, where there are some regulations on even using equipment.
Or cutting the wisteria at the base of the tree or doing things that are damaging the tree. We don't need them to cut the tree. We can incentivize getting the invasive off the tree so that tree actually can live, that there are solutions versus clear cutting the whole thing.
And I might add on that though, if we're doing that, just so we have this knowledge, I mean, what kind of cost, we just came from our affordable housing and our housing, what kind of costs are we adding to the development of a piece of property? By that, I have no idea. So that would be, I think, important to know as we're adding in another requirement for someone developing a piece of property.
Well, the education could also be that you're not going to have that kudzu crawling back up on the patio.
Well, kudzu is obvious, but some of those other things, I mean, there's a lot of things on that list, right? So, finding kudzu is one thing, but finding everything on that list might be a different thing. So, anyway, I'm just curious about that.
So we'll have some examples to help, as well as learning what all this is going to touch on.
So just some go-dos, just to make sure we're all saying the same thing.
Yes.
Definition of invasive species that we would use throughout our code that we'll provide at the next meeting. List of plant categories, 1, 2, and 3 that we can provide to everyone, just so everyone can see it.
It's in that email that.
Yep. Well, we can bring something in writing just in case.
And 4.
Yep, and 4. Education plan, I heard from Commissioner Thornton, sounds like we're already working on something to that effect. We can bring something about how we approach educating folks on invasive species. Enforceability, now maybe I heard this, but I'm thinking some sort of staff recommendation on how we would enforce what we feel most comfortable enforcing, what's actually enforceable. And then a tree list that's in the zoning code already, a tree and plant list that's already in the zoning code so you can see. And for our part, I think we probably need to do a cursory review of that list to see if there are any invasive species in the zoning code, and there may not be. Maybe you guys have already looked at it.
On what isn't allowed or what is allowed. So I think they do a list of what you can. So I know the tree council's put together a list of no plant, like trees.
In the code for redevelopment?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
So I think they have a preferred list too.
Yeah.
You might want it from the arborists.
Yeah.
So we'll come back.
The forester, that would be the foresters.
Wouldn't the arborist, but the arborist would planning.
It would be.
So I'm saying, I'm sure he's overseeing some of the developmental code parts, meaning the arborist.
And the only reason I say forester, because that's also the person that's liaison with us.
We'll come back to the next meeting with something to that effect.
PC.
And Sherry, for the ordinance work, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really comfortable with kind of whatever folks are interested in, because I think there's so much science behind the problem that invasive plants cause. Like, I feel like there's a very clear rational basis for the government to take action because it is a community-wide problem. So what I've already been doing is trying to find good examples from Georgia. Candidly, there are not a ton, but I'll bring everything that I can find in Georgia, and I'll be looking outside some other local, more regional resources to see if I can find some other good example ordinances to come back to.
Is that more work than a month?
I don't think so. I've already started it, so I really need to start looking outside of it now. I just didn't want to go down a rabbit hole if you guys were not interested.
Yes, we're good for next month.
Okay.
We're kind of passionate about this.
Yeah, we're ready. Y'all are ready. I love it.
Okay, so that sounds like another full discussion.
So November 2nd?
Yes, November 2nd is our.
NTMP will also be on the agenda if Commissioner Meyer agrees, or we can push that.
Is smoking also going to be on the agenda? Is the smoking ordinance also going to be on the agenda?
Well, if we.
I'd like to wrap this one up.
Yeah, it seems like we got those two. That one I think could be pretty quick, but this is more complex. So I'll talk with Assistant Manager Jones on that a little bit more. So, I mean, I think looking at 3 is a little too much, at a time. I do want to point out, just for all of us in our heads, that November 2nd is the second day of the month. It's just so an alert, it's going to be before our next voting meeting, because the way the dates work out the vote. So usually we're having the LRC afterwards. So just be aware of that that's before.
It's beautiful. This
Okay.
makes for a very long week for me.
Yeah.
So I'm happy about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's fine. Okay.
That's why I asked if the staff had.
Right. Got it?
Excellent.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, okay, motion adjourned.
Nice.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.